Kyiv's sky erupted in fire and steel as Russia launched one of its most intense air campaigns since the full-scale invasion began. In the early hours of May 24, 2025, a coordinated salvo of 14 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and nearly 250 Geran-2 attack drones descended on the Ukrainian capital. The primary objectives was the Antonov serial production plant, where Ukraine's latest Lyuty assault drones roll off the line, and U.S. supplied Patriot air defense batteries that have become emblematic of Western support. This attack marks Moscow's declared retaliation for a record-setting Ukrainian drone offensive last November, when at least 34 armed UAVs swarmed Moscow and forced the temporary closure of 3 major airports, the largest such strike on the Russian heartland to date. Russia's defense ministry framed these overnight strikes not simply as vengeance, but as a demonstration of its capacity to counter Ukraine's burgeoning drone fleet and to challenge Western air defense technology on the front lines. Air raid sirens wailed across Kyiv, driving civilians into subway stations and makeshift shelters. At Antonov, 3 separate conflagrations broke out as missile warheads punched through workshop roofs and drone motors came to rest among fuel reservoirs. Smoke plumes were visible for miles, illuminated by intermittent flashes as on-site fuel depots detonated. Satellite imagery later confirmed extensive damage to production hangars and adjacent storage facilities. Against this barrage, Ukrainian air defenses sprang into action. Patriot batteries launched volleys of interceptor missiles, while S-300 and NASAMS units engaged approaching drones and incoming ballistic threats. Ukrainian officials reported that the majority of drones were shot down, though debris from intercepted missiles injured several civilians and damaged residential buildings in at least 6 districts. President Zelensky's office acknowledged minor damage to 1 Patriot battery, but insisted the system remained operational and would be repaired swiftly. By dawn, the smoke over Antonov had begun to dissipate, but the plant's role in Ukraine's drone manufacturing ecosystem faced an uncertain future. The Lyuty drones produced there have become a thorn in Moscow's side, striking logistics hubs, supply depots, and even airfields deep inside Russian territory. Their rapid production cycle and low cost have forced Russian commanders to divert air defense assets and to reinforce critical rear area facilities. As the dust settled over Kyiv, both sides announced the simultaneous exchange of hundreds of prisoners, a goodwill gesture brokered in Istanbul and touted as the largest swap since hostilities began. Russia hinted that it would soon deliver a draft peace proposal, though Ukrainian officials remained skeptical, framing the proposal as a tactic to deflect international pressure and to buy time for further assaults. This escalation comes amid a broader strategic contest. Kyiv has ramped up long-range drone raids, targeting Russian rear-area logistics and airfields, while Moscow has intensified deep strike operations aimed at degrading Ukraine's ability to manufacture and deploy unmanned systems. The Antonov strike illustrates Russia's willingness to challenge the very factories that underpin Ukraine's drone warfare capability and to confront U.S. air defense hardware directly on Ukrainian soil. For you, the viewer, the implications are stark. The contest for air supremacy over Ukraine's skies has entered a new phase, one in which the front line extends deep into production facilities and where advanced Western systems become prime targets. This is the moment when the tools of modern drone warfare collide head-on, setting the stage for a conflict whose next chapter may determine the very future of air defense strategy in Europe. Kyiv's streets hummed with cautious optimism as hundreds of prisoners streamed across the tarmac in northern Ukraine. On May 24, 2025, Russia and Ukraine completed the second day of their largest exchange since the 2022 invasion. 307 military personnel released by each side, in what had already been a 3-day operation to swap 1,000 prisoners apiece. Emotional reunions unfolded against a backdrop of fluttering Ukrainian flags, tearful embraces, and soldiers clutching photographs of loved ones. While Ukraine welcomed its freed servicemen back with ceremonies and phone calls home, Russia's state media broadcast nearly identical scenes of returning troops, underscoring the rare moment of reciprocal acknowledgement in an otherwise bitter conflict. Within hours of the latest arrivals, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov declared that Moscow would hand Kyiv a draft document outlining conditions for a long-term peace once the prisoner exchange concludes. Lavrov framed this gesture as evidence of Russia's commitment to peace, accusing Europe of fueling Ukrainian drone strikes intended to derail diplomatic efforts. He insisted that only after the 1,000 for 1,000 swap is fully implemented would Russia present its blueprint for a ceasefire and potential political settlement. Yet the timing, immediately following one of the war's most intense aerial bombardments on the capital, cast doubt on Moscow's sincerity among Western capitals and Ukraine alike. The prisoner exchange itself had been brokered during brief talks in Istanbul on May 16th, spurred in part by behind-the-scenes efforts from U.S. intermediaries and encouragement from former President Donald Trump. Trump's endorsement of the swap and vocal support for renewed negotiations lent Washington a measure of influence, though Kyiv remains wary of proposals that might freeze the front lines without securing full Russian withdrawal. President Zelensky publicly thanked all parties for their role in facilitating the exchange, but privately senior Ukrainian officials cautioned against interpreting the draft peace offer as anything more than a tactical ploy by Moscow to regroup its forces and erode international resolve. That skepticism stems from the relentless cadence of Russian strikes that have ravaged Ukraine's defense industrial base and civilian infrastructure. Just hours before the prisoner handover on May 24th, Russian forces unleashed 14 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and approximately 250 Geran-2 drones against Kyiv's Antonov plant and nearby U.S.-supplied Patriot batteries. Though Ukrainian air defenses downed the majority of incoming threats, debris from intercepted warheads injured civilians and damaged residential buildings across 6 districts. The juxtaposition of a humanitarian gesture with simultaneous bombardment underscored the transactional nature of Moscow's diplomacy. For Ukraine, the exchange offered a temporary reprieve amid grinding attrition. Freed soldiers provided invaluable frontline intel on Russian tactics and morale, and their return bolstered domestic support for continued resistance. Yet Zelensky's government stressed that humanitarian gestures would not weaken its demands on full territorial restoration, accountability for war crimes, and guarantees against future aggression. Kyiv's negotiators have signaled openness to a phased de-escalation, but refuse to entertain any terms that would legitimize Russia's annexations or leave Ukrainian air defense and drone programs unchallenged. Moscow, meanwhile, has portrayed the swap as evidence that peace remains possible, even as it amplifies its assault on Ukraine's drone manufacturing hubs. Russian defense analysts argue that degrading facilities like the Antonov plant will compel Kyiv to reconsider its reliance on unmanned systems, which have inflicted heavy losses on logistics nodes and air bases far beyond the front line. By coupling kinetic pressure with diplomatic outreach, Russia seeks to split Kyiv's Western backers, some of whom chafe at the prospect of open-ended conflict, and to drive a wedge between Ukraine's military and civilian leadership over the costs of continued resistance. International responses have been mixed. NATO officials welcomed the prisoner exchange as a confidence-building measure, but warned that real progress requires sustained dialogue underpinned by verifiable ceasefire arrangements. The European Union urged both sides to seize the moment and produce tangible proposals, while the United States reaffirmed security assistance to Ukraine even as it encouraged diplomatic engagement. China and Turkey, both active mediators, called for an immediate cessation of hostilities, though neither party has the leverage to enforce a ceasefire on the battlefield. Ukraine leverages each episode of goodwill to solidify international support and to highlight Russia's duplicity when assaults coincide with diplomatic overtures. Russia, in turn, wields both threat and handshake to unsettle Kyiv's resolve and to demonstrate that it can strike at will, even deep inside the capital, while extending an olive branch. The prisoner swap and Lavrov's proposed draft peace are thus enmeshed in a broader contest over perception, endurance, and the daunting question of how or whether two adversaries locked in a 3-year war can ever bridge the chasms of mistrust. Thank you for watching. If you found the video helpful, then like and subscribe. See you on the next one. Peace.